you. Yeah, yo. There whenever it matters, and even more when you feel like it doesn't. Protect you so you never feel like you wasn't. Know I'm right alongside you. Either that or I'm behind you, but always got you. End of discussion, nothing means more. First one to offer is shoulders for what you reach for. Thought I saw the eyes of the world until I seen yours. And know that I ain't see a better view yet. I'm with whatever, so don't ever you fret. Know that you covered, not a hurdle or a heartbreak. A change what a partake, cause none of them won't ever get comfortable in your walkway. My job is to aware you, fully loaded, prepare you for all of the above that I'm never letting get near you. But still in all, give you every advantage I found. Couldn't find a better fit for them, along with my crown. And since the baton was passed, I've been down. Cause failing's not an option, and dad is not a noun, not at all.
Welcome to another episode of Dad is Not a Noun. My name is Ishmael, changing the narrative for men of color fatherhood, as well as changing the narrative on the things I care about. And today I have a special guest on with me today. I was on TikTok, and his brother was breaking down this bill that was written by a Republican to basically be the catalyst of dismantling the Department of Education. And I think it's important that we understand what's going on, because this is not a Republican or a Democrat issue. This is just policy that impacts rural communities as urban communities. And I'm truly honored to have this brother on. His name is Chris Lake. You can find him on TikTok with the name Behavior Booster. He spent 20 years in education, and he's here with me just to break down this bill, what you need to know about it, and what you can do to spread the word to say, this is not what we want something better. And he's with me today, the good brother, Chris Lake. Thank you for coming on, brother.
Thank you very much, Ishmael. I appreciate being here. It's an honor. It really is. As you said, there's a bill out that's looking to abolish the Department of Education.
But before we go into it, brother, I want you to break the knowledge. But the most important thing, because I'm all about mental health. And my first question to you, and I ask all my guests before we dive into the conversation, how's your heart?
How's my heart?
Yes.
You are the only other person I've ever come across who's asked that question. That's my question.
That's what I do, man, because I care about all my guests. Man.
I appreciate that. True to your name, Ishmael. My heart is golden, man. I got the peace of God within me. So any given day, I'm able to return to that. And that's just something about me. My faith carries me through many storms. So even as the world seems to be falling apart, I recognize that the divine has a plan, that we're not here by accident, that all of us have thousands of years of ancestors who didn't get us to this point by accident. And when you really put all things in perspective about how small we are and how big everything else is, I think it can kind of simplify what we consider pain and anguish and suffering and waiting and all that other jazz. My heart has peace because I have God in my heart.
Definitely. And thank you for
I do, because God's in all of us, and I feel like since we're all part of God, then ultimately, in the end of time, we win. The light shines. We see peace in our day, in our lifetime. Even that's my perspective. We can go deep down that rabbit hole if you want, brother. But
we can go wherever you want to go, because this is the great thing about this platform. It's about creating a space for us to be vulnerable as men of color, just people in general, because we really don't have that place where we can just share and talk and bond. Instead of being like a robot and people asking you the same questions over and over again. So that's the important thing about this platform. But before we get into this discussion, tell a little bit about your credentials. Let the people know your credentials a little bit.
Certainly. So I've been working with children with autism in the early intervention realm since 2004. 2006. So for the last 18 years, I've been working mostly with children between the ages of 18 months up to 4 years old who have autism, developmental delays, leg poisoning, etc., speech delays, you name it. However, since I was 14, I've been working with kids in general from birth to 19, 21 years old in children's hospitals. So I work with kids who had all sorts of different, not just disabilities and delays, but maladies, if you will, burn victims, kids who have AIDS, etc. Um, and I'm a certified licensed special educator from birth to second grade. I've been doing behavior therapy via applied behavior analysis since 2006 in clinical settings, hospital settings, home settings, as well as in schools and preschools. And I love it because it really is an evidence-based platform that produces results. It's recognized as the most effective treatment, and I'm going to use that word lightly, but that's the word that is in the nomenclature. It is the most effective treatment for autism. That's not to say that autism is a disease that needs to be cured, just to specify. However, there are certain behavior sets and challenges that people with autism, some, suffer with. So my job is to help figure out what behaviors can we improve, what behaviors can we direct, and what behaviors can we extinguish, so to speak, because they're either non-functional, aggressive, dangerous, or don't suit the overall environment the child is within. That's my background in a nutshell. Working as a special educator in 2014, I came across a child. He had lead poisoning, and to be fair, I've seen at least one kid with lead poisoning in every single classroom I've worked with since 2004. Mind you, Flint did not get on the national register until January 2015. So bear those dates in mind. So my class graduated 2014, the year before Flint, and my child with lead poisoning didn't make it. He didn't show up to graduation day. And to be honest, it kind of broke my heart. It still stings a little bit because I kept asking myself, what if what we're doing isn't sufficient? Because kids with autism, the nature of the disorder is one that's neurological in nature. There's a dopamine situation, there is a GABA situation, sometimes a genetic situation, like with the SHANK3 mutation of gene expression, etc. We can go down the rabbit hole, but it's a lot, and I'd rather keep it simple. With lead poisoning, there's a physiological issue. There is a presence of a physical toxin that is deposited inside the brain along the dendrites and the axons of your neurons. In other words, your brain can't communicate. The communication is being disrupted. Like when we first tried to get on this StreamYard and it got disrupted. So that's going to affect speech. That's going to affect behavior. That's going to affect so much. And sometimes it's unintended. It seems unrelated, but it's as a result. So a lot of kids with lead poisoning have aggression. And that aggression isn't directly because lead poisoning is pushing the aggression button, but when you cannot communicate, no matter who you are, there is an eventuality in human nature where you will communicate through aggressive means to be heard, unless or until someone tells you that this is unacceptable in one way or another. So long story short, he didn't graduate. It broke my heart. I ended up doing some research on lead poisoning and found that food, cilantro, quercetin that you can find in onions, turmeric, there's certain polyphenols that actually work to remove lead and other toxic heavy metals from your blood-brain barrier, from your body, from your bones. Chlorella and cilantro are the two big ones. Spirulina is also a good one. The algae, they work as sponges and remove that stuff in your system. So I found this out, and it was a true eureka moment for me. That led me to meet a woman who also worked with kids. We decided to throw a fashion show, actually, on this very date 10 years ago. Yeah, oh, wow. 10 years ago, it was a winter solstice, December 21st. We threw the Couture for a Cause fashion show at Toshi's Penthouse in the meat grinding district of New York. It was hot. It was fun. It made no money. It was the wrong crowd. We learned the hard way. We got the party in full crowd when we should have gotten the people who care about policy, people who care about kids. It was hot, though. Unhumble brag about that. But it did establish for me a 501c3. So even after all the smoke cleared and we had to lick our wounds financially, I realized, well, I still own this 501c3 now. What do I do with it? My wife was very instrumental in making me refigure it and shift it from couture for a cause to community for a cause. Because I still want to keep that C for a C, the lettering. And then I realized I can do whatever I want with it. And one thing that I've done since is actually push for policy. I started lobbying for kids with lead poisoning back in 2015. I actually got a law introduced to change how we blood test, because in New York back then, we allowed twice the limit that was the national standard. We were like okay with it. And it wasn't intentional, it was just an oversight. No one cares about poor black and brown kids with lead poisoning, let's be honest, right? How long did it take before Flint got the care they needed? And so I lobbied for this bill. 3 years later, it got passed. And then I realized, oh, okay, change is possible. And that was just me by myself knocking on doors. And I learned, I had to relearn civics, to be honest with you. And I tell people, like, anyone can change the system. I started with a petition. I petitioned the governor. I said, hey, let's petition the governor. So we got to change the way we're testing for kids. And I got 100 signatures on it, and I felt really good about myself because it was my first time trying that. But then I realized, Chris, now what? Like, okay, you got a petition, and then what? You're the one running this, so what's your A through Z? You got step A, what's B, brother? And I was like, I don't know. And then I had to go back to my schoolhouse rock and realize, well, who actually writes bills? Because it's not the governor. You know, the president doesn't write bills; they sign them. So I was like, okay, I gotta find a legislator, either a senator or an assembly member in New York and other states as a rep, and say, here's the deal. And I found out that people are just people. You know what I mean? That's why I want other people to realize these people you see on TV, listen, they put their pants on one leg at a time. You know, these people you see on TV, they got to cut their nails. They got to brush their teeth. They have bad breath. We are all the same at the end of the day. We just evaluate people differently based on how we see them, what they're wearing, how much money we think they have. Listen, you can talk to anyone if you're willing to. And some people are required to listen, especially legislators. So that being said, fast forward a couple of years later, I started doing some lobbying for sexual violence prevention, which I'm still doing. And I met more legislators. But that really got me reading bills. That got me interested in what's happening and how can I understand bills? How can I break this down? How can I reshape bills? And then I came across the news that the Department of Education was up for grabs. I found out about that first through Project 2025, but I was very careful to talk about that because the incoming administration, and I will not be saying names, I will simply be referring to them as the incoming administration.
Yes.
Well, it's associated with Project 2025. So I said, you can't push that too much because they can always say, I didn't write that. And they can say that because that's true. However, on Agenda 47, it did specifically say this goal for the elimination of the Department of Education. And I was like, well, this is nuts. You know, what's the plan? And, you know, we talked about it before. This is kind of a version of slow rolling class warfare. And that's not to say to get your pitchforks out, folks, but just be aware that there is not a left versus right. A lot of people are saying, oh, you voted for this, you get it. Oh, the Republicans, stop that. It's garbage. We need to bind together. We need to recognize how the system works and bind together because of losing the Department of Education affects all working class people, all lower income people, all upper middle class people. The people who it doesn't affect have a lot of money, okay? And that's why they're pushing this because ultimately the incoming administration is really looking to make a country where everyone is rich. And it doesn't mean they're going to make us rich. They want to get rid of those who aren't. And this helps serve their purpose. So I looked into the bill. I said, okay, they want to eliminate the Department of Education. You know, who's really pushing for this? And I found that Senator Mike Rounds from South Dakota put a bill out, Senate Bill 5384. And I studied it. I said, what is he proposing? Because there had been other bills in the past. This guy, Tom Massey from Kentucky, for example, he wrote a bill last year, HR 899, that literally just said on one page, the Department of Education shall be abolished. That was the whole bill. This is how thought out he made his legislation. To Mike Round's credit, there was more steps than simply just shutting the whole system down. But the question is, what really happens next, right? And so if you lose the Department of Education, you lose a lot of oversight, you lose a lot of expertise. And the plan is essentially to take the jobs, the work that those who are employed by the Department of Education, take that work and spread it amongst other agencies. So all the student loans, you'll still have to pay those back. They're just going to be moved to people in the Treasury. Things that affect the Native American community, that'll be moved to the Department of Interior, which actually works out for the community. I'll give them that. I've spoken to my friend who lives in South Dakota, Lakota Nation, blah, blah, blah. They're like, no, that works for me, so fine. Special ed, this is where it gets me because my whole channel, my whole Behavior Booster brand is targeting towards parents of little kids with special needs. And I'm like, I need to make them aware this will affect you. Because when they move all the work that those in the Department of Education did for special ed, and they plan to move it to the Department of Health and Human Services, which means someone who already has a job and works and has a caseload will now have another job. And if you've ever been in that position, ask yourself how efficient you are at doing the old job or the new job, okay? So we're going to lose oversight. Best case scenario, everything is just delayed for a long time. That's best case scenario. Because I've seen people in my comments say, oh, they can sue, you're fear mongering. I'm like, listen, the fear mongering thing is old. It's just People who have, you ever noticed this? The people who have no skin in the game are the ones who say you're fear mongering. It's
Yes.
it's always some mediocre dude who doesn't have kids, who's not a teacher, who's like, oh, you're just fear mongering. I'm like, you don't have any skin in the game, man. You're in the wrong room. And I feel honestly that we should all take a bit of humble pie moving forward. And if you're gonna talk about something that you don't have to Google to argue. You know, that's just not for nothing. You have to run to Google to make your next argument, counter argument. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you can get references on something to talk about, but not all opinions weigh the same. They don't. I don't know why people have this in their head. Like, I have an opinion, I should be heard. You're allowed to be heard because you have a voice, but it doesn't mean that we need that voice ringing in the chorus. Not for nothing. So the issue is that while some people argue that they can sue. They say, oh, if it's moved, people can still sue. And yes, people can sue if their due process is disrupted because they're losing oversight and they're not getting the services they're guaranteed by law. Because IDEA Act 1975 still exists. That's not repealed. And that essentially promises and guarantees a free and appropriate public education to all kids with special needs. That is not going away. The issue is, if you don't have enforcement, what is that worth? It's like if all the police in your neighborhood caught COVID at the same time and were just hurt for a week. Yes, the laws still exist. Yes, the police office is still there. But when you're getting robbed, no one can help you. That's what we'll be looking at. There'll be people who say, I'll help you when I get back. But right now, we won't have enforcement. At best case, be delayed.
That goes back to history-wise, when we talk about like the 14th Amendment and Black people being free and citizens, but that didn't protect them when it came to, for example, like the Akoi massacre, where you had a Black town that was basically massacred and taken over. When you talk about, like, you have laws in the book, but those laws wasn't there for them when they needed it.
Right. And what's it worth? What's a law worth that's optional, right? What's that really worth? That's a lot of our environmental laws. A lot of environmental laws, they have no teeth because there's no criminal enforcement. There's warnings. At best, they'll say, oh, you've broken this law, and it's more like a rule. So what the goal is, and you started off saying, let people know what they can do. You hear about this. I don't care if you're in a red state or a blue state.
Before you go into what people can do, just break down like those important factors that's going to impact people. I know you talked about it a little bit, but can you go into the impact of Title I? What is Title I, and how, if that's impacted, how that's going to impact parents and teachers?
Absolutely. So three groups that are going to be impacted the hardest, unfortunately, are the most vulnerable. And that's a lot of times what the ilk of the incoming administration tend to do, because it's punching down, and it's punching down on someone who historically doesn't have much of a voice, a footprint, or political power. So why not? So Title I it guarantees funding for low-income schools. And understand, people hear that, and the American narrative has brainwashed us to think low income means Black ghetto kids and little else. That's not the case. All right, let's just think about the fact that Black people are only 13% of this country, so we can't be, the low income schools in Maine, which is 95% white, aren't that 4% of Black people. Okay, like, relax. The low income schools in Montana, in North Dakota, they're not Black people. All right, West Virginia, it's not Black people. The 62% of low income schools 62% of schools in this country are low income. All right, this country is not as wealthy as we're sold, unfortunately. The average income for Americans is $74K, unless you remove the 813 billionaires that live in this country. And when you do that, it drops down to somewhere between like 54K to like 35K. That's average. Okay, so there's a lot of schools, public schools, that are low income, 62%. The bill, as it's written, says everything about the Department of Education will be abolished except what is written in Section 3. And Section 3 protects special ed, it protects the Department of the Interior, and it protects a whole bunch of student loan bills, Pell Grants, federal grants, etc. But Title I is not explicitly mentioned, which means it's able to be repealed. Okay. The other two groups that are going to be affected because it's not specifically mentioned would be the McKinney-Vento program, and this specifically allots money for children who are homeless. And if you don't think homeless children are going to public schools, I have news for you. They are. And it's sad, and it's not what we really want. But we don't want homeless children to not go to schools either, right? So that's a secondary program that's going to be hit. The third program, which is actually the most tragic if you think about it, because they voted for this, is going to be the rural schools. So there's something called the Rural Education Achievement Program. This provides funds to rural schools. A lot of rural schools in this country are in they don't have a lot of options, you know. And I'm seeing in my comments people saying, you know, I have to drive 80 minutes to get to my school and it's about to close. Then what? You know, homeschooling is not an option for everyone. Homeschooling is not comfortable for most people, to be honest. A lot of parent burnout happens from homeschooling. So while that narrative is going to be pushed, and be aware, I advise you to resist it unless you have a lot of experience being a teacher. And I have a lot of experience being a teacher, and I have a 4-year-old daughter. I have zero desire to homeschool my daughter. I understand that I can make sure she's not going to get indoctrinated. I don't want to do 7 people's jobs. That's what you'd be doing. You'd be signing up to do 7 people's jobs throughout your day, or choosing not to do the work that your kid could get for free in public school. So going back to Title I. Since the bill does not explicitly list Title I, the McKinney program, or the Rural Education Achievement Program, they are able to be repealed. If Title I schools have no guarantee towards funding, what happens next is this. The typical funding that's given out to states is put in what they call block grants. You're going to hear that phrase a lot, unfortunately. And what that essentially means is instead of giving the state their allotted money, like California, here's your $10 billion for school, and you must put this much towards your low-income schools. You must put this much towards special education. You must put this much towards McKinney-Vento programs for your homeless population, because your homeless population is massive. And you must put this much towards your rural schools. Instead, it says, here's the money, do with it, do whatever you want to do with it. Whatever you want includes giving vouchers out for school choice. It includes buying a brand new stadium for the school that the governor really likes. It includes however they see fit. And again, if there's no enforcement, sure, people can sue, but it doesn't really matter now, does it? Because you don't know how long you'll wait before your case is even heard, or if your case is thrown out. They can just throw your case out. We have a whole new set of judges that'll probably be coming in, and they're going to favor the policies of the incoming administration. Don't play fast and loose with kids' education. Don't play fast and loose with 58 million kids' education is the way I look at it. Well, we'll say 53 for public school. But a lot of people are living off the fantasy that, no, it'll all work out. And I'm like, based on what? Based on, it's easy to say that, but if you want to gamble towards the future of kids, and that's not like I'm not talking about some sort of obligated children of the future. Like, I'm not being funny about it.
Right.
If you don't take care of the next generation, no one takes care of you. If you don't make sure your kids are fed and educated, then within 6 years, you're going to see crime waves like you can't. This is just what happens with human nature. It's not fear mongering. This is what happens with human nature. There's never been a country in the world that just cut education and they did better, which is a wild concept to me. We're playing with this in the history of the world. We've never done that. And just so we can dispel a myth, the idea of kicking it back to the states. Listen, I get it, where a lot of people feel frustrated that we might have gotten too woke. The pendulum swings left and right. And in some ways, the pendulum might have swung too far left. Maybe people didn't need certain messaging. I will agree, certain teachers were definitely out of pocket. And in my opinion, though, what you need is a scalpel, not a machete, right? If a teacher's being out of pocket and they're talking about gender identity in a math class, that's I feel like the administration could say, hey, listen, this is a valid conversation, but not valid for that topic, not valid for that class, redirect your kids, let them talk to you after class about that if you want to share your personal story, if you want to share something. But if they're supposed to be learning trigonometry, and talk trigonometry. If you are discussing Stonewall in history class, talk about gender identity. It's like there's a time and a place for everything. And I think that was an issue in this election that made people really come out and vote, and it really bothered people. But again, to dispel the myth, the federal government has nothing to do with the curriculum. The federal government has nothing to do what teachers are teaching in Kentucky, in New York, in New Jersey, in California. And just to prove this, right? Simple example, in November, last month, Texas, under the current administration as we have it right now, with Joe Biden still as president, apparently, as the Department of Education still stands, they passed a law that said the Bible will be infused in their curriculum, right? Now, if the federal government is deciding what is the curriculum, how could Texas pass that law last month?
Right.
How? 2 weeks ago, New York City, not New York City, passed a law that it requires Black history infused in the curriculum. That's city, not even state. Possible if it wasn't some weird federal agenda. California requires ethnic studies. Jersey requires climate change. Florida requires you learn about the Second Amendment rights and civics and government. Arkansas requires personal finance. Different states have different ways, and there's a lot of different rural states that have agriculture programs available. I think Wisconsin actually has a dairy program available. So it does reflect the culture of each area. So that myth, we can't let them get indoctrinated. That's just a narrative that we've been sold. It's a lie. That is a lie. Kids are not being indoctrinated by the federal government. And teachers, let's be real about it, right? How does anyone buy that teachers are indoctrinating kids? Like, let's all be honest for a second. Let's be honest and just go back to your experience in high school and grade school. I would argue that probably 95% of all of us thought all of our teachers were squares.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anyone was like, yo, this one's going to convince me to change my sexuality for sure. No one's saying that. No one's doing that. A teacher can't convince kids to get off their phone, man. They can't convince them to study hard or do the homework. So you really think they're going to make them stretch that far in terms of how they see themselves? Kids see themselves how they see themselves. If their parents... And we don't have to love that because they're their own person. And I think that's another conversation for another day. But it's not the teachers who are making kids feel one way or another about their sexuality, gender identity. Kids have a right to feel how they feel, and we might just be out of touch, let's be honest. But they're not indoctrinating their kids. There's no LGBT agenda from the federal government. Again, otherwise Texas could not have voted to put Bibles in the classroom. And that's happened under the administration. There's been no changes, no bills passed. That's what we've had. It's literally always been that way. So relax on that myth.
And I think it's important to understand, separate culture from policy. These are two different things. When you have a scenario where they're like, to get people elected, they want to fear people into this woke ideologies taking over our society, and these policies are combined. They're not. They're separate from each other. And the importance of federal government is that they set the mandate when it comes to every state, when it comes to education. Like, all right, if you're getting this money, make sure you allocate this money for kids that has disability. This money I'm sending to, like, for example, to Mississippi, you're getting this amount of money. Make sure you take care of the kids in your state that has disability, kids in lower income areas, whether rural or urban. So this is the money set aside for that. And you cannot take that money to do whatever you want. And that leads to my next question is, we're pushing this age of privatization, because the ultimate goal is to privatize education. So if you want to talk about that part of the thing that's not mentioned in the article, but I think that's where we're kind of heading to.
Absolutely. And it's an excellent point. And we can also talk about the money issue, but first the privatization. That's long been a goal of just it's called the neoliberal Republican narrative. And it started with Reagan, when you saw massive tax cuts happen. And there's just been this goal to privatize as much as possible, because in their mentality, right? If you're in the ruling class, if you're in the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, if everything's privatized, you're just going to make out like gangbusters. You're going to make a lot more money. The more the government is giving out to people freely, so to speak, that's money that another company is not making money on, right? So if you go back in time, about August, the same senator who wrote this bill, again, South Dakota Senator Mike Rounds. He wrote another bill. And in my head, it's a masterful chess move because you do the setup before you get the kill, right? And this bill is 4926, and it's like the Affordable Loan Act program, but don't quote me on that, obviously, but 4926. What this does is makes available student loans from private lenders. This has not been available for the last 14 years. Now, on the face of it, it seems like, oh, that's good. Kids have more of an opportunity to get money for college and what have you. But then when you look at this in tandem with his current bill, what they're looking to do is require people to turn away from the government for student loans. And again, it's masterful. They're excellent chess players, and that's why we also have to pay attention, not drown in the dross that's on X or Twitter or the news, because honestly, the culture wars are really what's going to punch through. The things that really matter to us, that affect us, they're really talking about. They're not talking about the Department of Education. You never hear them talking about clean water. You never hear any political party talk about domestic violence. There's certain things that we see, hear, and experience on a daily basis that the government's never trying to touch. And if they did, our lives would really be majorly affected in a good way, but that's not the concern. So they'll talk about gun violence, which is unresolvable. They'll talk about abortion, which is a philosophical unresolvable issue. And they love philosophically unresolvable issues because they come back to it again and again and again. They'll poke the race bait there. They will. They haven't come back to anything regarding Muslims in a while. They kind of left that issue alone. But if you really pay attention, there's like a wheel of fortune that they spin, and they know what gets people emotional. And then they sit back, and while we're arguing back and forth about whether this congresswoman should be able to use a bathroom in Congress, which again affects none of us, they're going to pass a bill that undermines unions. They're going to pass a bill that's going to affect our ability to eat, to gather, to protest. There are bills out there that make it so people can't protest the way they used to. Not everyone knows you have to get a permit now in order to protest. It didn't always used to be that way. Which means if you tried going about it the way you thought was fine, you'll get arrested. Just be aware of what actually affects your community. Police getting qualified immunity affects your community. Trump wanting stop and frisk to be required in order to get federal programming, that affects your community. Trump wanting universal concealed carry across state lines, that affects our communities. And they're not going to talk about it in the news because while the news used to be, well, it still is, I suppose, the fourth branch of government, it used to work as a check, and now it just kind of works as smoke and mirrors. So, be aware, do your research. But going back to the money and allocation, the way this bill works really hurts a lot of places. I told you last night, Pennsylvania stands to lose $1.5 billion. The way he wrote this bill, and I'll try and really nutshell it. Not everyone likes math. I like math. I'm a nerd like that. He wrote it in a smart way. He wrote it in a way that on the face of it, it's equal. And it's in his section, you go on page 4, line 14, it says allocation to the states. And it says states, and they use they use language. Like it's really beautiful the way they operate because they know like they won't get it. And if you're reading some stuff, you want to make your life easier, right? I love giving people hacks. My book is all about parenting hacks, and they'll give you some more hacks, just political hacks. Take a bill, and if you're trying to read it, and you're like, what is this person trying to say?
Right.
Cut and paste, plug it into ChatGPT, and say, explain it to me like I'm a 5-year-old. Or whatever age you prefer it talk to you. And it will break it down. It's like, oh, this statement essentially means this. You're like, thank you. Now I know what they're honestly trying to say. You can do this with so many different documents to just get a better sense through the jargon and the legalese that they're going to throw at you intentionally to box you out if you haven't studied this. So that being said, the way he wants to allocate this, he uses a formula, which again makes sense. Add up all the kids in the country, that number is about 58 million, right? Whatever percentage of kids your state has, so like New York has about 5%, it's 4.92, it's about 5%. So if you have 5% of kids, 58 million, then you get 5% of the budget that usually goes to all the states. Right. It makes sense. Mathematically, it's sound. It's equal, but not equitable. I had a video on this. Check it, break it down and give a perfect example. Pennsylvania versus Georgia. Pennsylvania and Georgia have roughly the same amount of kids. Okay. Yeah. Issue is Pennsylvania has one of the highest rates of kids with special needs. Georgia has one of the lowest rates of kids with special needs. They need a different amount of money. Not all kids need the same amount of money. Rural kids need a different amount of money than, Boca Raton kids in Florida. All right. So when Pennsylvania gets the same amount of money as Georgia, then they actually lose $1.5 billion from the year before, whereas Georgia gains about $500 million from the year before. This is not equitable. Financially, they're getting the same amount of money, but how does Pennsylvania thrive? How do they provide for their special needs kids, their rural kids, their homeless kids, their Title I schools when they're losing $1.5 billion? And I know people say, well, people can sue. Yeah, I get that. But you have to understand the reality of the sequence of events. The school first recognized we don't have money, so we have to cut programs because we can't afford to pay the music teacher, the art teacher, the speech therapist, the counselor. Any non-essential or less essential teachers or staff will be cut. Okay, they're going to keep a bare bones staff. Maybe a resource officer that's going to be going to, which schools will be less safe because they can't afford it. Like, it doesn't matter if you sue, it still takes time to have your court recognized, taken up, thrown out, etc. And in that meanwhile, the person who's running a business says, I can't afford to pay you, so you guys are gone until we get money, because we lost $1.5 billion statewide. And you can sue. You can sue. Go ahead, feel free. Just recognize it takes time. I don't see how people think it's TV.
And then the key thing you were talking about too, and I think that's important to add to this discussion, is this is when the privatization takes over, because you have someone that has the business. I have a business that can help disabled kids. Give me some of that little bit of that tax dollars money, and I have a program already, and you can set shop up for me so I can take care of that need in Pennsylvania. But the sidekick is that you're going to have to pay me for your kids to benefit from our program.
That's the thing. It benefits the wealthy. It doesn't benefit, like, and people think the wealthy are thinking, oh, no, it's the wealthy. I'm talking like, if you're making, if you have a dual income and both of you are making $300K or more, you'll be all right. Straight up. If you're making less than that, like, you will feel it. Simple as that. You will feel it. You will. And it might just simply mean that you go from having 4 vacations a year to 3. That's how it's going to start, though. You recognize that. You know, the people, and for people who haven't been in, I'll say, a lower income or working class lifestyle, downgrading is going to be a lot more uncomfortable for you than for those who've been in it. Just a heads up. Just a heads up. I'm not going to get into how. Ishmael's laughing for a reason. When you've already been in survival, all right, man. You know what to do.
But that's the reality. Unfortunately, this is like 40 years in the making. Like you were talking about. Like, this started like 1980. This is nothing new. This is just something that just over time it became the norm. Like, these policies that's totally been put in place, now it's like the reality. It's like we're used to it. You know, when we talk about, when we get mad about inflation and everything like that, and shitty schools, like, this is nothing new. It's just we adapt to the shittiness of it. I don't know if shittiness is a word. I guess I created a new word, shittiness of what we live in right now.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and it has been a long game. And these people play a long game. You know, I was telling my wife the other day, most people don't realize how the uber wealthy, like exceptionally wealthy, operate. They don't think, the more wealth you have, the longer scale you can think comfortably, right? If you are living from paycheck to paycheck, you are thinking on a week by week basis, if not less. If you're barely making it through paycheck to paycheck, you're thinking on a day by day basis. And that's it. You can't think, 5 years from now, I see myself. No, man, I got to make sure that I can put food on the table tonight. What am I going to do? You got to find a side hustle. You got to do something. You got to reach out to people. You figure something out, but it's a day-to-day grind. You know, the families of Johnson & Johnson, they invite other families from corporations, like the families who own corporations. Like, there's certain families that have owned different ones. They invite them to this event where they discuss how to maintain and keep the wealth in their family for the next 5 generations. 5 generations, all right? That's how long-term they're thinking. They have meetings about this. They plan this stuff. So when we say 40 years, the people who thought this, you know, Mitch McConnell was okay realizing it'll take more than a decade. You know, we have to plan, we have to think about things in that manner as well. The privatization is something that really suits them, and it makes money, and it allows them to point the finger at the working class and blame them. Like, why didn't you pick yourself up by your bootstraps? Because we're not realizing that they've been gerrymandering for the last 30, 40 years so hard to make it almost impossible for people of color to have their vote matter as much as it did 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. They've been tweaking laws and fighting certain laws and using distraction methods for so long that we're just exhausted. And, you know, I tell people, don't give up the fight. Don't lose your bite. Don't be irrational or reckless at the same time. Don't be violent. You know, like there's certain things that you have to recognize. It's important to be methodical. It's important to recognize how the system works. For me to get the bill, for me to get my first law passed, I had to be honest with myself and realize I don't know how things work. You know, awareness grants responsibility. But if you're not aware, first step is to be honest and be aware that you're not aware. You know, and I'm like, you know, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm not, like, me personally, I'm not having a debate with anyone about tariffs. Right. That's not my lane. That's not my lane. I'm going to talk about special education. I'm going to talk about education. That's my lane. And if I'm looking at the world, I'm upset about something, like maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, do some research. But like, make sure when you're doing research, I know people say do your own research. It's been going on hard for the last 4 years. Understand how to do your research, because there's watching 2 14-minute YouTube videos and thinking because I've digested half an hour of content, I am now an expert. And also recognizing that you will not have this knowledge in 2 years. No. Versus an expert who studied and read books for 5 years, 7 years, decade more, the knowledge they have in their brain they've had for 10 years, and they will have for 10 years more. We have a lot of disposable information that's thrown our way. People who are experts overnight on cytokine storms, if I approached them right now, sans computer, sans phone, and just said, break down to me how a cytokine storm works, I'm sure they'd have very little to say right now. So let's be honest about what disposable income that disposable ideas and information that we're holding that we don't really know much about, you know? But educate yourself at the same time. It's just that we don't need to argue and debate. We need to plan and gather. We need to build community, and we need to build bridges. And I say that second part intentionally because until the Black community and the Latino community can build a bridge with the rural community and the working class white man community, we will never rise up. We will never rise up. We won't. We've tried in the past. We know what happens. When brown people try to rise up, they put us down violently. They will put us in a situation where it ends up being push comes to shove, and any man in that box is required to respond with violence, and then they can point the finger and say, oh, see, just like we read about in the history books, they're violent. No, man, you've been doing financial violence on us for the last 400
if you think about it, the reality is, if you think about Dr. King and he stopped pushing the poor people campaign, then he gets assassinated. When you think about Fred Hampton Jr., who was bringing all communities together, you see what happened to him. He gets assassinated. Right. And so people seeing that in history, they are afraid to government and bring people together because they're afraid that could happen to them. But at the same time, you can say, it's like, what makes those guys so unique is that they weren't afraid of death. They're like, I'm in my purpose. This is what I'm supposed to do. And if I die, then I die. But I die because I did the right thing.
Right. We need more men and women who are willing to make that step. It's better to die free than to live a slave. Straight up. It just is. And the thing is, like, you know, I tell people Marcus Garvey was right. But aside of him, when you look at Martin and Malcolm, right? Malcolm had the right idea, but what Martin did got us progress. And not a lot of people recognize, if Martin Luther King Jr., Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., aimed to do today what he did 60 years ago, the Black community, the left community would look at him like they would disown him. They would cancel him. And I'll tell you why. Because Lyndon B. Johnson was a overt racist. He regularly used the N-word without shame. He did not care for the Black community whatsoever. And our mentality right now is like, oh, I can't mess with Ben Shapiro. He's racist. Mind you, I can't mess with him. But at the same time, someone needs to. Like, we need to find people who are willing to cross that bridge and say, listen, some of the things you say I don't agree with. Some of the things I say you don't agree with. But let's find a way to actually climb up. Now, Ben Shapiro might not be the best example. But when it comes to legislators, we need to meet with people, Republicans. We need to meet with people who are centrist. We need to meet people who might have a different perspective on Israel and Gaza and not instantly demonize them because they have a different perspective. We need to meet people who are in the LGBT community and meet people in the Christian community and just like get over our differences for like a weekend and say, okay, you see things a little different than I do, but we're both working for our kids. We want to make sure education is free and appropriate for kids and guaranteed. Abolishing the Department of Education challenges the guarantee of free education. It disrupts it. It doesn't repeal it. And that's what's clever about what they're doing. And they know what they're doing. It just disrupts the guarantee. So yes, there will still be public school that's free, but they'll also be closing because they won't be able to afford to stay open. The strings will be tied in such a way that, yeah, it's a block grant, but at the same time, incoming administration has said if you are pushing certain policies, anything that has to do with LGBT, anything that they consider CRT, and anything that's DEI, they have a right, I don't want to say a right, but they have spoken that they will withhold federal funds. All right. So how do they define DIE? How do they define CRT? Is talking about slavery in a negative light for them CRT?
Right.
If they talk, are they able to talk about Jim Crow South at all? Is that considered CRT because you're saying, well, this is a landscape that free Black men and women lived in, and this is shaped? I don't know. I'm going to assume yes. I'm also going to assume that a lot of the ways they treat Native Americans, they won't be discussing, and they'll say that's CRT or that's diversity inclusion. So we also have to be prepared to school our children in our communities and explain to them the truth. Explain to them the truth of where public housing came from and what existed before that public housing was constructed were Black houses. Black people, brown people lived in their own homes that the government came in and said, this is blighted, we're going to knock it down. They had no choice. Eminent domain has been used on Black people for as long as we were free to take away our land. Black farmers weren't allowed to. Black farmers, there's covenant laws. That's going to be lost in schools where you couldn't pass your own property down to your next of kin because you were Black. You weren't able to sell your property because you were Black. Where did the highways come from? Look up the Federal Aid Highway Act. This is something that they're not going to teach our youth, and we have to tell them, like, listen, before highways existed, there were communities of Black people, of Latin people, of Italian people, of Asian people. They all lived together in peace. And then the government came in and said, this land is blighted, you all need to leave. And then the communities split. And that's why you have these different pocket cities. That's why you have Little Italy. That's why you have Little Haiti. That's why you have, Asian communities. We all used to live together. We were cool. But this country decided to split us up. Divide and conquer has been a tool they've used successfully as a sword. And if we're not aware of how they're operating, then we can never rise up. And part of how we rise up is binding back together with groups who actually are just as affected by these policies as we are, even though they don't stand up. The thing people have to recognize about the Black man and woman in this country is that we've always been unafraid to stand against injustice. That's why we're hated so much. Other cultures will come here and they'll say, I'm not going to deal with it. What do you want? You don't like my name? It's too confusing for you? I'll change my name for you. Are we cool? All right, great. Oh, you guys are going to treat me like second-class citizens? I'm just going to keep my head down. We're the only ones. And the Native American, man. But their population is so small that it's hard for them to have a footprint. But they're that's the difference. And you have to recognize that, all the Black youth out there, recognize our heritage, man. We came from somewhere. And even if the history books moving forward introduce Black people for the first time in their history books during slavery, we existed long before that. We helped shape Europe. We helped shape the Arab nations. We helped create this world in so many ways that whether the history books in Florida and Texas want to demonstrate, just make sure you use your own time to research who Mansa Musa was, what the Irish was, what the ghost of Mali had to offer, what the mathematicians gave Europeans, the fact we invented. How, you know what I mean? How we helped Europe Black Plague. There's so many things to be recognized that aren't highlighted in our history books. And for a lot of adult Blacks, we had to find out on our own when we were adults because it just wasn't given to us. And then they want us to feel bad about the history and just take it. And it's important for us to recognize the true history. It's important for education to improve. When they try to demolish the Department of Education, they want a less intelligent population. They want a population that is stuck. They want a population that doesn't know how to get unstuck, and they can just put bills and loans and trap them in more debt in different ways for a virtually illiterate population that has no chance of getting out of that cycle. So this is an important issue that affects our community. It affects every community, and
Yeah.
and I'm going to be vocal about it until it goes away. Now, here's the good news, right? I want to give people some good news, right? So this is a bill, and it's in the Senate, but it's not in the House. And bills need to have two versions, one in the Senate, one in the House. If you don't remember your schoolhouse rock, there's no House bill yet that matches. And
Right.
there are people who are really opposed to this. Some Republicans are opposed to this. It would likely have to go to filibuster. They do have a loophole called reconciliation where they can skirt around filibusters. However, it really has to be a budget issue, and there is what's called a Senate parliamentarian who will be like, this doesn't pass the mustard test.
Yes.
I'm not going to shout out Kendrick Lamar's mustard, but I want to. Um, so there's a chance that it won't pass, but also be aware, even if this doesn't pass, they're still going to try to gut funding for the Department of Education, and we need to be ahead of it. That's the thing. What we do is make phone calls. You can call your congressional senator, especially if you're in a red state, especially if you have family in a red state, or not gonna lie, if you want to call a red state up from wherever you are and pretend you're from there. Just not saying you have to do this. It is effective, and if you do that, I'm just gonna say this: have a zip code ready. So because they're gonna ask, oh, where do you live? You say, oh, I'm in zip code, 34128, whatever it may be, and say I don't want to say my actual address, but I'm in the zip code, and they'll count towards their software that they manage what people are calling about. We need to be ahead of it. We need to be a nuance. We as Black people, we as brown people, we as all people need to call and really more than ever in our honest lives engage in local politics and say, like, you need to know I'm not going to vote for you if you do this. You need to not touch that issue. I hear this guy Behavior Booster talking about you want to remove funding for homeless kids. If you do that, trust me, I have a community of people I represent, and we will not be voting for you. Put them on edge, and you call them again, and you call them again. Be a pest. Get a group of friends, like 5 or 6 friends, so you go agree. Every single, you got Monday, I got Tuesday, you got Wednesday. Okay, every single, I'm gonna call. They'll know your name. Don't worry about being annoying. They don't care about annoying us. They don't care about disrupting our lives. They're so detached from the reality of what we're going to experience from this. The detachment of reality that when they offer people school choice, that doesn't come with busing. The detachment of reality, tell people you have school choice, that you don't choose what school your kid goes to. The school chooses if they want your kid, period. And those schools are already fully enrolled. So it's not like they're going to miraculously open up 5 extra classrooms so your little Johnny can sit there because you voted for Trump. Sorry, that's not how it's going to work. And they sell you on this because it sounds good. They pulled the Napoleon Dynamite. Vote for me and all your wildest dreams come true. And everyone just believed it. Like, sorry, man. They just want to make money. They just want to make money. And if I privatize as much as possible, I'll make money. If I offer student loans outside the government, I can invest stock in Navient and I'll make money. If I make it so that public schools are closing and now homeschool kids are going to need educational technology, I can invest in that educational technology and I'll make money. It's all a money thing for them, man, and they can't stop themselves because like that's the lifestyle. And so you have to make their job more difficult.
Yeah, that's the nature of the beast too. Is listen to what they say and listen and watch what they do, because the next budget they were talking about everything's on deck. Social Security, Medicare, like it's the obvious.
Right.
They want to cut what $5 trillion off the budget, and how are you going to cut that? You're going to have to cut Social Security, Medicare, and education. They're not going to touch the military.
Right. I mean, right. And I was about to say, like, if you want to save some money, why are you not looking at all this money? Listen, I think they had like $1 trillion unaccounted for during the Bush era, and that's it. No questions asked, no punishment. No one lost their job. I'm sure people got promoted. Like, you lost $1 trillion American dollars. What are we doing? Yeah. You'll jail us if we don't pay taxes, but then when we give you this money, you can't even tell us what the money's going for. You're building another F-35, a plane that we've known since the 90s is not effective, and we don't fight those kind of wars anymore anyway. What are we doing? We're beholden to so many defense contractors. It's ridiculous.
No, it is. And this has been a great conversation, man. I loved it. I want you back on. I think also too, we have to talk about the teacher aspect of it. Because what I read in the article, talk about a little bit of Title II and how that's going to impact teachers.
All right. Well, a couple different things happen to teachers. I mean, obviously, one as funding is cut. Hypothetically, this bill passes. Hypothetically, and different states have less funding. Schools are obviously going to have to cut certain teachers, and I mean, absolute first ones to go are going to be extracurricular, art, music. They just won't have. They can't justify that, unfortunately, when they don't have enough money. But then you're going to lose support staff, speech therapists, like you said, resource officers, counselors. They'll also be scrapped. Teachers will have larger class sizes because you're going to have less staff. So now, and some teachers are going to leave. Some teachers say, "Well, I don't want to be here anymore. We already have a teacher flight. We have since COVID." So you're going to put more pressure on the people who are already working, and that's going to have teachers going from classrooms where it's 30 kids, 35 kids to 40 kids, and possibly more. That is not an environment kids can actually thrive in. They can survive in it, but it is very challenging to manage 40 people in one room, especially if they're kids. Let's just be honest about that. Also, he plans to change the incoming administration plans to change the teacher certification so that teachers must, again, they must teach patriotism, and obviously not teach anything that's DEI, CRT, etc. So there's a bit of word policing that's going to be going on for the teachers. There's going to be obviously a not nativist, but nationalist lean that teachers must have and somehow incorporate in the classroom. You know, when Texas is saying they're requiring Bible curriculum in the schools, I'm curious how do you incorporate that into science class? In what way are you infusing that into your curriculum? Is that your literacy? Is the English class going to be kids reading the Bible? Because I don't know which version you're using. All of the versions are outdated language. They're outdated versions of English. You know, I'm an ordained minister. I read the Bible pretty much every day, and you know, there's still times I'm asking myself, why did you phrase it like this? This isn't how people talk. I see the wisdom. But again, like that's part of the issue. So you're also going to have people who just don't want to be in that environment. You're going to lose teachers. You know, there's 38 million teachers who work in public schools, and if you don't have enough funding to pay all of them, obviously you're going to lose that. Teachers are going to be burnt out, and they're going to have less support. As it is, most teachers buy most of the supplies, and they're not getting a pay raise. So you're asking someone to do a lot more work in a more uncomfortable environment with less. This is going to lead to teachers walking off. In some places, not like across all schools, obviously, but in some places, just human nature, man. Let's be honest. No one wants to stay at a job where they're already underappreciated, underfunded, and they're going to have their days are going to be taxed. Not to mention, if you're a teacher and you have 20 kids and you have to, let's say you're a high school teacher, and you have to grade papers, you have to plan tests. Now you have more work to do. That as class size increases, again, like there's so many subtle nuances to how much more challenging this makes life for people across the entire board, for the sake of the richest getting richer. I wish them well. I really wish they could hit a pause button and say I'm good. I feel like if I had $1 billion, I'd be like, I'm good. Just gonna rock this life out now and hit the gym. I don't know.
I think that's the gist for them, making more money. That's the gist for them.
They can't stop, man. They can't stop. It's unfortunate because it would be nice if there was someone out there who was aggressive about like having a legacy of saying, you know, I want to be the person remembered as the guy who cleaned the entire ocean. Because Bezos could do that. Musk could do that. He could be like, I'm going to just put like $5 billion towards cleaning the entire oceans. And now for the rest of human history, I will be remembered as the man, singular, who cleaned the oceans.
Yeah.
Eradicate homelessness. Make sure kids weren't hungry. That's never on their docket, man. It's never on their plate. It's never. It's never.
No, you're absolutely right. And it's the reality. But the most important thing is that we have a choice in this fight to do something or not do nothing at all. And I think what you did by posting that video and educating people about what could happen, which part of me feel like may not happen, but in a multi-universe society that we live in, like the Marvel Universe, it could happen. So it's like you're giving people the scenario, this could happen. So
Right.
before this can happen to actually become policy, these are the things you can do. So
Right.
before we end this conversation, just talk about what do you see happening next when it comes to this policy, this bill.
What I honestly see happening, I don't think this bill will pass, but at the same time, it's because people have been reaching out. You know, I had a video where I showed that the bill was literally the second most viewed bill in the country on Congress.gov. That's official. If you go right now to the December 1st tab, you see in that week it was the second most viewed bill because people were calling. People were saying, "Okay, this is happening." That changes the landscape. They recognize people care, and that helps. Again, don't be jaded. Don't be despondent. The more people actually engage, that's what's going to be a change maker in this country. We just saw Republicans split over the spending bill because at least 38 Republicans said, my people don't want me to raise the debt ceiling. Their constituents matter to them. So there's others who aren't just going to simply fall in line with the narrative and just follow marching orders. Thankfully, which means we should call out, which means we should talk to other people like us or not like us who are affected by Department of Education. I think what will happen if this bill doesn't pass, I think they will still try to pass something in the budget to gut how much money that the Department of Education can give out. You know, in 2024, the Department of Education gave approximately $177 billion across all 50 states and territories. That's a lot of money that the government wants to save towards that $5 trillion. And if they say, you know, we're going to cut Pell Grants and it's going to make privatized grants, they can do that. There's so many different ways they can affect it and not have to worry about that supermajority vote. So that's why I say don't sleep and keep calling to make it an unpopular issue. I think everyone needs to call every single week and let them know I care about public education. Don't touch it. Don't touch it. Call about whatever else you care about too. If you care about Social Security, you should be calling your congressional senator. Let's be clear on that. You have your local state senators, they can't touch this. Your congressional senators, your congressional reps, call them and say, hey, don't touch Social Security. I swear to you, I will make sure everyone I know comes out during the midterm. Hey, don't touch veterans benefits. I swear to you, if you do, we will, like, what's your issue, man? And I'm talking men too, not for nothing. Men, what is your issue? Because they need to hear from men. I promise you, I've been doing a lot of legislative work for the last 10 years. Women are out here, man. Women are out here, elderly are out here, you have some youth out here, but it's mostly women. And I keep looking around saying, why are there not more men out here saying, don't you dare? Because it's the men who are making the rules. We should be out here saying, I'm not okay with this.
Yep.
Call for your issue. Figure out what your issue is. Figure out what affects you. Don't sleep on it. Something affects you. Something affects your family. Something affects your mom. Something affects your auntie. Recognize that we're all connected and it affects your community or something, and just make a phone call. Honestly, it's a 2-minute phone call to say, hey, my name is such and such. I live in your district, or I live in this zip code. I'm your constituent. I care about this issue. Please don't touch it, or please vote for it. Please don't vote against it, whatever it may be. But all of us need to do this, and we need to be comfortable doing this. Yes, it might be your first time that you've ever called your legislator. It might be your first time calling congressional senator, looking them up, whatever. This is our future, and the incoming administration and people who are in alignment with what can come next are not playing. And they've been planning this out since Reagan. And if the prior 2025 stuff comes to pass, we're in serious trouble because it's not a simple, like, oh, in 4 years we can just fix it. They're really honestly aiming to change the American government in a way where it can't go back to Democratic control ever or other control. I prefer if we had more parties. I prefer if, like, the Working Family Party was bigger, or we had more voices that could say, well, listen, we need to talk about domestic violence. We need to talk about clean water. We need to talk about kids getting healthy, whatever it may be. And that be an ongoing issue instead of Second Amendment rights over and over again, First Amendment rights over again. You know, like the things that expand the conversations. But be active. Be active. Be active. Find issues. If you don't have any issue, then call about the Department of Education and veterans benefits, just because they deserve it. I'm not even a veteran. That's the thing. What gets me, man, I don't have, while I'm a special educator, right? I never a day in my life went to public school. I still care. I've never taught in a public school. Yes, I've been a teacher for 18 years. I still care. It doesn't need to directly affect you to care. You don't have to say, well, I'm not a victim of sexual violence, so why should I? It doesn't have to directly affect you, man. Like, try to be connected to the community. Trust me, it's better for your soul. Like try it out. And when you see the win, you'll be like, yeah, that is cool. You know, I'm like, just try. That's what I say. Try, because we need more people trying, and we can get through these 2 years if we do the work. I'll put it this way: if we do the work in the next 2 years, the following 2 years will give us more breaths of relief. If we don't collectively do the work for the next 2 years, the next 4 years will hurt.
Prime example. Look at COVID.
Right, 2016 to 2020 hurt. It hurt,
and
it hurt.
People acting like COVID never happened.
Right, I don't get it. Like the amnesia effect. I'm like, yo, we lost over 1 million Americans. How is everyone like, no, this is great. Let's go back 4 years. I'm like, 4 years ago, I was cleaning groceries. I don't want to. Why? Because you got a check in the mail? Yeah, because you couldn't work. You couldn't work.
And if you were forced to work, you couldn't sue the company because you got because they put it in the stimulus bill that companies were protected from getting sued if your employee got COVID at work.
I mean, that's another example of class warfare, top down. That's not left or right thing. That was across all states, man. It's like, listen, like, we need you to work, as opposed to, you know what, we're just all gonna. They could have printed money. They could have given us off. All we really needed was 2 weeks to not engage. They said, listen, we're gonna give everyone take off for a month. Everything stops. We just 1 month. Here's enough money so that you can direct, either fresh direct or something. Have someone drop groceries off for your door, and then we'll all get back to everything. We would have been fine. That's all we needed. But they kept messing up the messaging and canceling out what doctors are saying and all this jazz. You're looking at it like, why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? And we handle it so poorly. And they look at countries in Africa and like, how do they have a lower rate of COVID than us? Because obviously, in America, we think lowly of Africa and every country in there. They handle it better. They had a better sense of community. They did better listening. Like, we can do better too. And I look forward to us working together to do better. And I think we can.
I hope so, because I don't want to go back to COVID days where people like buying like 30 things of toilet paper and not giving them back to their neighbor, or hand sanitizer, and reselling it for double its worth. I don't want to go back to that place.
No, I'd pass. It was everyone was just so full of anxiety and irrational at the same time. I mean, it just didn't make sense. I mean, do you remember Q? This is a bit off topic, but do you remember Q went on? You know what I could never figure out? I can't figure out how people, they fawned over this concept, right? They didn't know who Q was. Still don't know. No one ever came forward and said, I am your Q. Never knew. But people followed every word of this Q until things didn't work out, and then they just stopped talking about him. I'm like, don't you guys feel like that was nuts? Like, do you guys have pause and reflect and say, why do we follow a name that we can't trace? It could be a 13-year-old in Estonia that's just trolling us, and they don't know. We're not as smart as we think we are. It's what I tell my wife. Like, as a species, we're not there yet. We think we're a lot smarter than we are. We are very intelligent in some ways, but holy Christmas. In some ways, we're very easily manipulated, and it's just kind of sad.
But, yeah, because the guy that we would not mention is having a second term, so we'll leave it like that. Any other person who was leading the country in COVID would never win, or would never even try to run again. Their political career would have been over after COVID.
I mean, it's a testament to how much we worship the rich, or just perception of wealth. We assume if someone's wealthy, they're right. It's interesting. Just to go on a dad topic for a second, my wife and I had a conversation with our daughter. we had a conversation with ourselves first because it's Christmas time, right? We're Christian, and our daughter's 4 years old, and we said we both are in the same boat. We don't want to give our daughter the Santa lore. We were like, you know what? I don't want to tell my daughter Santa's real. I don't want her to tell friends. I don't want to be like, Santa's not real, get over it. And then it's just raw. I don't want to do that. But I don't want to tell her Santa's a real guy. He's coming. And same boat. I don't because for me, honestly, it's the eventual death of Santa. I don't want to deal with when they have that moment they realize you lied to me for however many years. You've been lying this whole time. That shifts how well they can trust you for the rest. You know what I mean? So I'm like, but we're not gonna do it. What we did was tell her quite simply, Santa's a tradition in some houses. Santa's a belief in some houses. We don't practice that tradition in this house. Right. Like our Jewish friends, like our Muslim friends, we don't practice it. But you still get presents. We're still gonna do lots. And she was fine. That's all she needed. That was it.
Right.
That was all she needed, and she's good. And I reflected. I started thinking, like, there's something funny that happens when we sell kids on Santa. There's something called prosperity theology, right? Prosperity gospel. That's big in the evangelical church, and it's a narrative that we have, that we all have in America, right? The American narrative has just painted a part of our brain with this prosperity philosophy that essentially, if you're good, you will have good things. If you're a good boy, you're a good girl, Santa will come and give you really good gifts. If you're bad, you get nothing but cold. And so you're told that as a kid, and this kind of metastasizes, right? Because as a kid, you start realizing you see people who don't have much, well, maybe they're not that good. Maybe they didn't deserve to have good things. Maybe it's their fault. And you see the rich people and say, oh, they have a nice car, they have a lot of money, they're good people. And so, I'm kind of wanting to avoid my daughter having an unintentional narrative, and that's part of my bias in avoiding the whole Santa lore, because we've all been sold by it. Is Elon Musk going to save us? People fanboy on him that hard that they think he's really going to make life better for any of us. I heard a comedian say, and it was hilarious. He says, Elon Musk talks to saying, we listen to billionaires because they talk, but they're talking to themselves. And he says, we're going to Mars. He says, we're not going to Mars. We are not going to Mars. He's going to Mars. But you think it's going to be an affordable price for you and I and the person who's riding the bus? Like,
no,
it's an idea for us, man.
But I like how you break it down, because this mindset is taught to our kids at a very early age, and we develop this. We adopt this into our grown-up lives, and so it's just crazy, man. I enjoyed this conversation, brother. Thank you for coming on, man. How can people find you?
I'm here, man. I'm here.
How can people find you on social media? How can people find you? Because I know by January 19th there will be no TikTok. So will you have any alternatives find you after January 19th?
Yeah, man. Have me on anytime, dog. I'm here for you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
But how can people find you?
All right. Yeah, that's great. You can find me on Instagram or TikTok at Behavior Booster. If you want to go to behaviorbooster.com, that's my site. You can buy my book, Help Your Toddler Meet Their Milestones, 101 Behavior Hacks. I have ebooks on picky eating, ebooks on tantrum management. Hit me up. Reach out. I'm taking clients. You can get a free 15-minute consultation if you sign up before the end of the year, because I will be booked. And we could talk about issues that if you have a young one who has either special needs or just challenging behavior, my work is helping to just improve behavior and remove the less than great behavior, and allows the kids who are 2, 3, and 4 specifically. Again, at Behavior Booster on TikTok, you're going to see more of my political content, but also my parent-driven content. At Behavior Booster on Instagram, see more of my parent hacks and all that jazz. Ishmael, dad isn't a noun. Appreciate very much for giving me this platform. Remember, guys, call your congressional senator. You find them at congress.gov/members. Find my member. Find out who they are. Call them. It's a 2-minute call. Make the call once a week. Tell a friend. Tell a friend. We all are in this together. We have to make the work. Men, do the work.
Do the work.
I know the women
And hopefully in this conversation, we created this behavior of getting involved. And getting involved is not just putting a comment in TikTok and just liking and sharing. Putting in work is actually doing the work, talking to your local congressman, creating a group of people that's interested into the policy and doing what the good brother Lake is doing right now. So again, this has been another great conversation on the podcast. Like, subscribe, and we're out. Peace.